Kia ora, g'day and welcome to the history of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Episode 14, Birth of a Legend. Far out in mid-ocean, a bundle of seaweed rose and fell on the waves. Overhead, the seabirds wheeled and screamed. A baby, tightly wrapped in its mother's hair, lay cradled in the seaweed that protected it from the birds and the terrors of the deep water. The baby was Maui, little Maui, wrapped in the top knot of his mother, Taranga. It was Maui, the fifth son, the unwanted, who had been thrown into the sea with only his mother's hair to cover him. Presently, the bundle was washed ashore, and as it lay on the sand, the birds became bolder and the flies clustered around it. The baby began to cry, for the seaweed was shrivelling and falling away, and the flies were beginning to settle on its tender skin. From his house by the cliffs, great Tama of heaven heard the thin wailing cry. He ran to the heap of seaweed, lifted the tangled hair, and unwrapped the baby. His eyes widened as he saw little Maui lying there, blue with cold. Holding the baby very carefully, he hurried with it to his house and tied it to the rafters, where it swung gently to and fro in the warmth of the fire, and presently began to laugh and wave its arms. This was Maui's first adventure, in which he was saved from death by the friendly seaweed and the old man who lived on the borders of the sky. As he grew up, he learned many things from wise old Tama, the ways of the birds and their language, and of the cunning of fish, the games that are played by children, and the thoughts of the old people as they sit round the fire at night. He grew in height and learned about the forest creatures and magic that made them his friends. Last of all, he learned where his mother lived. "Now I go to my own people," he said to Tama one day. "Yes, you will go to your own people," Tama replied sadly. "You will leave the old man who has taught you so much. You will do many wonderful things, Maui, and there is only one who will be able to stop you. You will have many adventures, but the last will be the greatest of all, and you will lose that fight. No, my son, I will not tell you what it is. It will be a good thing to be in that fight, but it will not matter that you lose. We all lose that fight, Maui, but you will not be forgotten. Now go quickly, my son. The world is waiting for you." Maui ran along the sand dunes. He climbed the hills to the west and dropped down onto the plains. In the distance, there was a house with a thin curl of smoke rising above it. In his bones, he felt that this was his mother's whare. It was dark by the time he reached it, but he was guided through the forest by the sound of singing. He looked round the door and saw that a fire was burning on the floor, and that smoke was rolling through the house. Maui slipped inside like a shadow and sat down behind one of his brothers without being seen. Presently, his mother came up to her children and said, "Stand up when I call you, so that we may dance." Maui taha, the eldest brother, stood up. "That's one." Maui roto. "That's two." Maui pai. "That's three." Maui waho. "That's four. All my sons are ready." Then little Maui stood up and came out of the shadows. "I am Maui too," he said. His mother stared at him. "Oh no, you are not Maui. All my sons are here. I counted them myself." "I am Maui," the boy insisted. "These are my brothers. See, I know their names. Maui taha, you, Maui roto, Maui pai, and Maui waho. Now I have come, and I am Maui, the little one." "I have never seen you before," his mother replied, while Maui taha, Maui roto, Maui pai, and Maui waho stared at their brother. "No, you cannot be Maui, little stranger. Where do you come from?" "I come from the sea. The waves were my cradle. The fish and birds fought for me, but I was wrapped in my mother's hair." His mother caught up a torch and held it close to his face. "What is my name?" she asked suddenly. "You are my mother, Taranga." She leaned forward then and clasped him to her. "Yes, you are indeed my little Maui," she said. "I have found you again. You will be the 5th Maui, and your name will be Maui Tiki Tiki a Taranga, Maui who was wrapped in the top knot of Taranga. You will live here with your brothers, and you will be my own little son again." Maui Tiki Tiki a Taranga was a mischief, and now he had 4 brothers to torment. When they played with their kites, little Mauis always flew the highest. When they played tag, which they called wee, Maui always ran the fastest. When darts were thrown, Maui's fern frond always went the furthest. At the breath holding game, Maui could always recite the longest. At swimming and diving, Maui was always the boldest. He was a friend of all the forest folk, and because of the magic he had learned from Tama, he could turn himself into a bird and escape from his brothers when they were angry with him. Because he could do all these things and poke fun at them for being dull and slow, his brothers hated him. But Maui did not mind that, for he laughed at them and went off to play with his friends, the birds. Only one thing ever made him unhappy. He had never seen his father. Every night he slept beside his mother on the floor of the whare, but when he woke in the morning, she was not there, and he did not see her again until night came. "Where does my mother go in the daytime?" he asked his brothers. "How should we know?" they said. "Because you have known her longer than I. She may go north or south, east or west, we do not care," they said. When Maui saw that they would not tell him, he made up his mind to find out for himself. One night he stayed awake, and when he heard his mother breathing softly, he knew that she was asleep. He crept to her, and taking her beautiful girdle and apron, he hid them under his sleeping mat. Then he went to every window in the house and blocked up the cracks where the light would creep in when morning came. At daybreak, Maui's mother woke up and raised herself to see whether it was light. Outside, the clouds were tinged with pink, but in the whare there was not even a glimmer of light. She lay back down and went to sleep. When she woke up again, the inside of the whare was still dark, but the birds were singing. Taranga sprang to her feet and opened the windows to see the golden sunlight everywhere. She looked for her girdle and apron, but they were not there, so without waiting to search for them, she threw on an old cloak round her shoulders and ran outside. The sudden light in the whare wakened Maui, and he slipped after his mother and followed her outside. Presently, he saw her stoop and pull up a tussock of grass. Underneath, there was a big hole into which Taranga dropped lightly, pulling the grass back over it again. Maui knew now that his mother spent her days in the twilit underworld. He hurried back to his brothers. "I have found where our mother goes during the hours of the daylight," he cried. "She goes to our father in the Shadowland. Let us follow her, my brothers." "Why should we care where she goes?" one of them said, and the others agreed. "Yes, what do we care? Rangi, the great heaven, is our father, and Papa, the earth, is our mother." "Then I shall find her," Maui said. "She is my mother. She brings us food and stays with us at night and loves us. I will find her." He took his mother's girdle and her cloak and dressed himself in them. While his brothers watched, Maui shrank to 1/10 of his size, and they saw a beautiful pigeon where he had been standing. The girdle shone white and pure on his breast, and the soft glowing colours of his feathers were taken from his mother's apron. The brothers cried out in delight as he lifted his wings and soared over the trees to the place where his mother had disappeared. A moment later, he had lifted the tuft of grass and plunged into the hole underneath. He dipped his wings where the cave was narrow and flew on through the winding passages that led to the underworld, until he came at length to a fair land where there was no sun and the air was still. There were trees growing in that place, tall and leafy, but there was no breath of wind to stir the leaves. He flew on to a low branch and perched there. Presently, several men and women passed by. Two of them stopped and sat down under the tree where Maui had perched. One was his mother, and Maui knew that the man must be his father. He picked a berry with his beak and dropped it so that it fell on his father's head. His mother said, "The berry must have been dropped by a bird." "No," said his father, "it was ripe, and its time for falling had come." Then Maui picked a cluster of berries and threw them so that they hit both his father and mother. They sprang to their feet while other people came hurrying up, for they too had seen the pigeon. The birds of the underworld were drab and grey. The men threw stones at the beautiful bird, trying to dislodge it from its perch. Maui shifted from side to side and dodged the stones. At last, Maui's father threw a stone, and the pigeon at once tumbled from its perch and fluttered down to his feet. It grew bigger, it lost its shape of a bird, it grew tall and slender, and there stood a young man, with the beautiful cloak around his shoulders and the white girdle shining against his brown skin. Maui's mother knew her son. "It is not Maui Taha, my firstborn," she said, "nor Maui Roto, the second, nor Maui Pai, the third, nor yet Maui Waho. It is my little Maui, my youngest son, Maui Tiki Tiki Aotearoa," and she held him tightly to her. "This is the child who came by wind and wave. You will bring joy and sorrow to the world. You will bind the sun, Maui. Maybe you will even conquer death herself." Maui went with his father to be baptized, and the spells that were repeated over him helped to make him brave and unconquerable to the last. So Maui, the littlest one, lived happily with his parents, and the pigeons that flitted through the bush were glad, because they now wore the glowing colours of the cloak of Maui's mother. But Maketutara, the father of Maui, and Tauranga, the mother of Maui, were sad, for they knew that part of the spell had been forgotten at his baptism, and Maui could never hope to conquer the goddess of death in his last and greatest deed. As he grew familiar with the underworld, Maui noticed that food was prepared carefully each day and taken to someone whose name was never spoken. Maui liked to know the reason for everything, so he asked, "Who is that food for?" "It is for your grandfather, Muriranga Whenua." "Ah, I have heard of him," Maui said. "Let me take the food to him." He took the basket and carried it off to the gloomy home where Muri lived, but instead of taking it to the old man, he laid it down in a dark place where no one could see it. Each day, Maui took the food and hid it, until Muri became hungry. His voice rumbled through the arched caverns. "Where is my food? Who is robbing me?" Maui stood still while his grandfather sniffed the food. "If I catch him, I will eat him," the old man cried. He turned and sniffed the south wind, but he could not smell anything. He turned to the north, but there was no man scent there. He turned to the east, but again there was no smell. Lastly, he turned to the west and sniffed. "Aha!" he cried. "I smell him. What does a silent man-thing want in the lonely underworld?" He sniffed again. "Is it Maui, my grandson, the little one?" he called. "Yes, it is I, Maui Tiki Tiki Aotearoa." "Why are you taking my food, little Maui? What do you want, little Maui?" "I want your jawbone, Muri my grandfather," Maui replied. "Give me your jawbone and I will give you food and leave you in peace." Muri thought for a while. "Bring me the food, Maui," came the deep rumbling voice again. "Bring all the food. I am old and have no need of my jawbone. Take it, for you will need it soon." Maui went forward fearlessly. He took the sacred jawbone of Muri and hurried back to his mother's home. He hid it under his mat and treasured it until the time came when he could use it. We will leave Maui there, prepped and ready to go on his next great adventure. We will continue his story at a later date, but next time we begin our look into Māori carving. Specifically, we discuss the main tool used by Māori, the toki, adze. We will talk about their mythical origins, as well as how they were made, from the quarry and forest to the craftsman and carpenter. If you want to send me feedback, ask a question, suggest a topic, or just have a chinwag, you can reach me through email at historyaotearoa@gmail.com, or Twitter at historyaotearoa, or Facebook at History Aotearoa New Zealand Podcast. Aotearoa spelt Aotearoa. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes or your preferred podcast platform, and to tell your friends to help us grow and teach more people about the history of our island nation. As always, haritu atu, hoki tu mai. See you next time.